I've covered the history of the Saab Viggen generally in other videos, but the JA-37 DI is somewhat of an unusual version of the plane. Only a small number of airframes were modified up to the DI standard, which was basically the same as the D model upgrade, but it added some interoperability with NATO and capability for joint operations with other countries. The cockpit instrumentation was changed to knots. There were some modifications to the radio, along with the IFF system, the radar, and some of the other electronic systems. The DI was also capable of carrying a U-95 jamming pod, which unfortunately consumed one of the hardpoints occupied by an air-to-air missile. Starting in the mid-1990s, the Viggen was slowly phased out of service as it was gradually replaced by the Gripen, with the final airframe being retired in 2005. What we get in War Thunder are two versions, the JA-37 DI in the tech tree, and the JA-37 DI F21 premium aircraft. In this review, I'm focusing on the F21 premium version, but the two planes are basically identical copy pasta, so this review applies to them both. These jets are at BR 13.0 for air battles and 11.7 for ground. The jet has a ballistics computer, along with a CCIP for its rockets and cannon, along with an EEGS for air combat. Its radar warning receiver is a fairly basic sensor-based unit that detects I and J band signals, but it really only has entry-level functionality for a jet in rank 8. Its radar is the PS-46A, an I-band set with an all-aspect pulse Doppler mode, track-wall scan, and fairly long range, but this radar set has a number of drawbacks that I'll discuss in a couple of minutes. For loadouts, the jet can take up to 6 air-to-air missiles, rocket pods, and a centerline drop tank. That's it. Your dogfight missile is the RB-74. This is an AIM-9L. It's a 30G all-aspect infrared missile with pretty good short-range performance, but it's still not especially difficult to flare off if the opponent times their countermeasures right. Your radar missile is the RB-99, a Swedish designation for the AMRAAM. It gets active radar homing, inertial guidance, and data link support. This weapon does pretty well at medium or even long range, depending on your altitude, and it's going to be the source of the majority of your kills in this jet. The flight performance of the JA-37 DI is similar to earlier versions of the Viggen, but the news isn't good. On its own, this jet has fairly good flight performance. It's fast, has a good rate of climb, and some strong instantaneous turn agility. The problem is that it's been power crept really hard by other aircraft that have been added to War Thunder over the last couple of years. This is a late third-generation fighter, and it routinely goes up against fourth-generation aircraft, including very modern examples like the Eurofighter or F-15E. This means that while the flight performance looks pretty decent on paper, it ends up being seriously behind the curve when compared to its opposition that it fights in the game. The acceleration lags behind other jets, its rate of climb is really just average, and its energy retention in sustained turns or twisting dogfights is pretty awful. If you actually want to win conventional dogfights with this, your air combat maneuvering is going to need to be absolutely perfect, and you've got really almost zero margin for error. Even if you do everything right, some opponents can simply outrate you at basically any speed, regardless of your maneuvers. Plus, there's more. The fuel consumption is really high, and even with the drop tank and full fuel, I often found myself really close to being out of gas at the end of a match when I was evaluating this jet, since you have to rely on the afterburner almost constantly just in order to keep up with the other planes at rank 8. The Viggen also has a lazy rudder, which makes coordinated turns a bit more wobbly than in other jets at this tier. Lastly, this thing is just plain heavy, and at low speeds, the controls get really sloppy. Flying the JA-37 DI out in air battles can be kinda difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. The plane just tends to struggle unless you get a full down tier. If you're shopping for a premium or new to top tier air battles, you might find yourself completely overwhelmed by the chaos, but take my word for it, it might not be you, it might be the plane in this case. It really can't keep up with the rest of the team at the start of a match. The red team is going to outclimb it, its radar warning receiver is an entire generation behind or further, and its radar set has some major limitations. The range presets for the radar scope are at very inconvenient distances, and almost no matter where you set it, it feels like it's either too short or too far. Plus, it only has one angle preset for track while scan, and it only has one basic ACM frame, which is just a small square directly ahead. Oh, and no helmet-mounted targeting, which is a noteworthy disadvantage in the current top-tier air battles meta. I had the best luck with this jet, trying to flank out wide and pick off stragglers from the enemy team, rather than trying to charge in with the main furball. Only having 6 missiles, and only 4 with active radar homing, ends up being another serious handicap, as you have to be a bit more picky with your shots than you are in something like an Su-27 or an F-15. Shoot and scoot tactics can sometimes work, where you pop up from behind a terrain feature, throw out an RB-99, sorry, and then turn around and hide again. Speaking generally though, this jet has a pretty large number of disadvantages that knowledgeable opponents can use against you, and the jet ends up being pretty challenging to get high-scoring matches with. There is a faint glimmer of a silver lining though. The JA-37 DI gets a good quantity of countermeasures, 368 charges in total. This lets you dump them out proactively to try and prevent enemy radar or weapon locks, and gives you a little bit more freedom to spam them off in a crunch if you get a missile coming in at short range. Now, in terms of ground attack capability, really just don't bother. Even with the full load of rocket pods, the ammo count is just too low to be useful. Use this thing for air combat and that's it. Visually, this jet looks mostly the same as the other Vigans. The paint jobs are all just the solid gray with some slight variations, and it's still got that distinctive Vigan look with the heavily area-rolled fuselage and almost kind of a hunched back appearance. Head up War Thunder Live for a new paint job if you want to spice things up a bit. Landing is fairly easy, but different. You can drop gear at about 600 kilometers an hour and landing flaps at about 400, but the Vigan doesn't get a drag chute. It uses a thrust reverser to help slow down on landing, so it might not be a bad idea to practice that once or twice when you first get the jet, and make sure that you have a keybind set for it. Inside the cockpit, the visibility is pretty good, but the radar scope is lower than I prefer and it's obstructed by the flight stick. You get a really nice moving map display though, and generally it's an okay cockpit for VR. To close out with the JA-37 DI F21. This jet gets a huge supply of countermeasures, it gets active radar homing missiles, and it gets premium bonuses. However, its flight model just isn't competitive at rank 8. Its quantity of weapons is a bit low, and its radar settings are inconvenient. The final verdict on the JA-37 DI F21 is that, if I'm being completely honest, this might be the worst of the high-tier premium jets simply because of its BR. It routinely gets up-tiered into matches where its flight performance seriously holds it back. It might suddenly become a lot better if the BR ever drops, even just down to 12.7. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this other one.